Hi there, DPR the man, that's who I am, and welcome to this week's edition of Here's the Thing. Well, as I mentioned in the last show there, I haven't been on Facebook in ages, and I do go on occasionally now because I kind of want to see what opinions are floating around out there, and I ran across a post from a friend. And again, I'm not mentioning any names because I haven't contacted these people regarding that privilege. However, this particular friend is a respected person and a respectable person and spends his life following respectable causes, if you will. That being said, in a continuing effort to avoid having my entire shows dedicated to politics, I found the topic that I just had to address this week. Now, I've made reference to racism many times in the past. Anyone who wants to know about that can go into the archives, if you will, and check it out. I've been consistent in saying that racism goes both ways. Well, going on Facebook one day, I found out that I may have been a little bit off the track. So let's begin at the beginning. The definition of racism, according to several dictionaries, is the belief that all members of each race possess characteristics or abilities specific to that race, especially so as to distinguish it as inferior or superior to another race or races. Now, I don't see any reason why we can't all agree on that. But the next definition I'm about to give shows you where I'm going with this diatribe. The definition of discrimination. The word discrimination. Number one, the unjust or prejudicial treatment of different categories of people or things, especially on the grounds of race or age or sex. Number two, recognition and understanding of the differences between one thing and another. And number 2A, the ability to discern what is of high quality, good judgment, or taste. That one right there could preclude the others and solve a lot of problems, but we'll move on. One of the things that I've attempted to educate you on is the art of communication. So here's another lesson in semantics. Racism and discrimination are two different concepts that are interrelated. If one is a racist, then one discriminates. However, if one discriminates, one is not necessarily a racist. Let me hear a whoa. Whoa. What did he just say? Well, I have to break for a story. Last summer, my son was 9 years old. He came home one day and asked us, what is a racist? Well, needless to say, we had to ask him why he was asking us that question. As it turns out, about half of his friends outside of school are black. And one of those friends in particular is perfectly fine when it's just the two of them. However, when Andrew found himself in the presence of this particular boy or any one or more of his black friends or relatives, he was called white boy, gay, and racist. If he denied their request to do whatever they wanted to do, they'd call him a racist. Fact. Andrew's only objective up until then was to have friends. Not once did he comment to us regarding their race. So we found ourselves describing racism to our 9-year-old. It had to happen sometime. We told him that he had done nothing wrong. We asked him if he had degraded any of those boys in any way. We had not, and have not to this day, heard him use a denigrating term regarding any race. It's not that he doesn't know the words. It's just that he knows it's wrong to use them. We told him he was right. There have been many occasions since then when black boys, if they happen to be in the majority at the time, have reminded our son that he's white. And each time he's chosen to leave the situation and come home, he knows he can't win. We had to tell Andrew that his friends treated him that way, then if his friends treated him that way, they weren't friends. He just turned 11 recently, and he's beginning to understand that painful concept. Okay, now that I've told that story, it's time to get to the meat of the issue. Racism is a human behavioral psychological trait. Under no circumstances will I allow anyone to purport that I say that racism does not exist. I got that comment from someone. They actually thought that I said that racism didn't exist. It most certainly does. What I do say, though, is that racism is a behavior of choice. Each and every individual on the face of this earth has a choice to believe that they are superior or inferior in some way. It's what they do with that belief that makes the difference. That's where discrimination comes in. Under the Constitution of the United States of America and the laws of the United States of America, discrimination in most situations is illegal. In other words, if you behave in a different manner towards one person versus another because of their race or their religion or their sexual preference or their gender, you are violating the law. It seems to me that the government has done everything they can to make it clear that we all deserve equal treatment under the law. Now, I have neither the time nor the inclination to get into all of the controversy over how the laws are enforced. What disturbs me is the fact that discrimination can be practiced by anyone, including those against whom racism may be used. Including those against whom racism may be used. If I'm not going to say that someone is wrong simply because they're black, then why can a black person say that I'm wrong simply because I'm white? Don't try to tell me that doesn't happen. The Constitution of the United States of America was largely written by white people. The civil rights laws, such as they are, were largely written and enacted by white people. But according to some activists out there, because they were written by white people, the Constitution and the laws are wrong. How's that for circular logic? Remember, this country is run on a majority rule. Like it or not, it's one of the ways that the country has succeeded as much as it has. It's one of the reasons why we all have the right to talk about what we think is right or wrong. Now, for those of you who engage in productive conversation over the topic of racism, do you not recognize that if you're not careful, you may fall into the trap of over-acknowledging the differences rather than the similarities? It's a fact that cultural and behavioral differences exist between various races. However, in this country, that's acceptable, and indeed should be encouraged. The problem comes when any one group denies equal treatment to any other group based upon those differences. So many people get involved in trying to understand other people's cultures without actually being able to experience them. We are who we are, and we grow up with what we grow up with. I have no desire to live in a black culture because I'm white. And I don't expect a black person to live in a white culture because they're black. In an ideal world, my hope would be that we all live in the American culture. In that culture, we are all equal under the law. We all have the same ability to acquire and attain our goals, and we simply look at each other as being on the same mission. Now, when I say American culture, I mean an all-inclusive culture. Every ethnic group that has ever entered this country carries a heritage with them. Eventually, their heritage blends in with what we'd like to call the American heritage. Every ethnic group that has ever entered this country has had its difficulties integrating into society due to discrimination or racism. But over the decades, we found ourselves celebrating ethnic traditions that weren't necessarily our own to start with. It just seems that the issue of race, particularly black and white, never goes away. Why is that? The white population of this country is in the majority. White politicians in this country are in the majority. The black minority in this country is a very large block of voters. So what better course is there to take than for the white politicians to pander to that large block of voters? There's your reasoning. Before I move on and tick off a bunch of people, this in no way indicates that I believe that the Constitution or the Civil Rights laws should not exist. Of course they should. That's not pandering, that's common sense. What I'm getting at here is that it pays the politicians to keep the conflict alive. If you allow people to resolve their differences, then you can't take sides to earn their votes. That goes for the black activists as well, such people as Reverend Jackson and the Reverend Sharpton and the Oprah have constantly made virtually every issue regarding the black and white conflict an issue of racism. As soon as that happens, the entire country has to walk on eggs in order to decide what to do about it. When are you all going to wake up to the fact that conflicts between human beings are going to happen regardless of race, color, or creed, or gender, or sexual preference or religion? Again, that is not to say that there are no racist events. It simply says that not every event is racist. If these activists could not get away with what they're doing, they would lose their notoriety and their power, and in some cases their funding. They wouldn't have a job. One of the observations that I heard a long time ago was that the leaders of the civil rights movement back in the 60s and possibly even the 70s, up until the death of Martin Luther King and maybe shortly thereafter, let's say, those leaders were in favor of raising the dignity of the black community, making them equal under the law, of course, but bringing dignity and self-esteem. Okay, so since then, unfortunately, what's happened is that some of these leaders and their descendants have been more interested in gaining political power, government positions, public notoriety, than they are in helping their community. They keep telling their community how oppressed they are and how little opportunity they have. In other words, lowering their self-esteem, taking their dignity away, claiming that people are still out to get them, which may be true, but the vast majority of the white population has moved on. So why do these people persist in causing this non-existent conflict? Okay, so again, it just shows that many of the people who purport to be helping the black community are indeed keeping the black community in its place in order to perpetuate their jobs. Okay, so I move on. I submit as follows. We are all being insulted by these people. They have proven that thus far we are gullible enough to think that they're smarter than we are and that they are indeed better people, so we better listen to them and do as they say. They are not discriminatory when it comes to whom they are insulting. Dr. Martin Luther King preached that every person of color should be allowed to rise to the best of their abilities and be judged by their character rather than the color of their skin. Many of today's activists are preaching that white people owe black people something. Well, then we owe Italians something, and Germans something, and Japanese something. an Irish something. Because at one point or another, all of those groups had their difficulties integrating into society, or staying that way, as the case may be. They all moved on. Dr. King didn't want anything given to anyone other than dignity and equality under the law. Many of you out there either didn't live during Dr. King's time or have chosen to forget what Dr. King said. I was there. I heard it. I watched the evolution of the destruction of Dr. King's message by those who would use discrimination and racism as a weapon. As a conservative, I believe that we should all be treated equally under the law. I have practiced this in my work ethic, in my positions of authority, in my attempts to perceive all sides of a story. Obviously, I made a point to be as familiar as possible with any laws or regulations regarding the treatment of those with whom I was associated. That wasn't hard, because in good conscience, it was a lot easier to treat people as though they were valuable than it was to treat them as though they were some sort of liability or threat. That's a choice we can all make. As you know, a funny thing happened. And I should say, a funny thing happened. Each and every one of those people had a value. My objective was to give them the opportunity to make it or break it on their own. I would do all I could to give them the tools, but if they decided to drive a nail with a saw, there wasn't a whole lot I could do about that. At some point, they had to take responsibility for their actions and abilities. There wasn't a whole lot I could do. I can't tell you how many times the race card was thrown at me by customers or co-workers. I can't tell you how many times I heard reports of the race card being thrown at my fellow workers by customers or co-workers. What can I tell you? It broke my heart that these people had to resort to such tactics when simple discussion would have solved the problem. Not once did I tell any of them that I wouldn't discuss their issue. But apparently, because I was white, they decided to discriminate against me. Just to back myself up, I need to point out that upon bringing some of these incidents to the attention of the vast majority of my black customers, they were incredulous based upon the interactions that they were aware of. So let's sum all this up in order that I can talk about this at some future time. I am not a racist. I do not think that my race is better or worse than any other. If you look at the definition of a racist, that's what they think. I don't think that. I know there's differences between the races. I know they look different than me. They may sound different than me. They may think different than me. They may speak different than me, as I said before. However, that doesn't make them any less human. The human race is what it's all about. We all have the same problems, the same goals, the same dreams, the same goals, if you will, at least as far as I know. If we allow other people to tell us we don't have them or can't get them, that can change things. The only thing that I discriminate against is ignorance by choice. I fully realize that every individual has different abilities and different levels of intelligence. I am a citizen of the United States of America. I believe that every citizen of the United States of America is entitled to the same opportunities and the same treatment under the law. If every one of us believes this, then every one of us would occupy our time by maximizing our abilities and intelligence as we're allowed to do. Every one of us. That way, we would not have to be told by people who cast themselves as wiser than us what our opportunities are. If an individual chooses not to take advantage of all that they can be, then they are making excuses based on semantics. They're blaming other people for their problems. They're listening to other people tell them what their goals and dreams and aspirations should be. Basically, they want someone else to make the effort for them. In many cases, that someone else is the government. And the government is us, the taxpayers, the people who fund all of this. It doesn't matter what race, religion, or gender they may be, because at that point, that's where my discrimination comes in. No one is a lesser person by nature, but anyone can be a lesser person by choice. In a continuing effort to improve upon the Here's the Thing viewing and listening experience, I'm in the process of putting an improvement on the website. It's a work in progress. It might take a while until I figure out the ins and outs of my web page production program, if you will, my web designing program. However, my effort is going to be to produce an audio archive. Excuse me a moment. Two computers. An audio archive. Now what that means is that if you go to the website, http://www.heresdathing.com, and look for the link, excuse me again, to the audio archive, you can listen to any show back to the very beginning, every show made prior to the video era. If you go to Google Plus or YouTube, you can watch any show made since the beginning of the video era. It's that simple. So keep an eye on the website. Right now, if you push the button, you'll get the list, but the links aren't working yet. I'm working on that. It will be fixed. It won't be long. So as long as that's up there, you'll probably see, click on any, go to the audio archive and click on any show you choose prior to the video era, work in progress. Or you'll just see work in progress and a button that says HDT audio archive. I haven't decided how I want to do it yet, but I want to let people know what's coming, because it's important that I find ways to reach people. And if you want to go back and check out other things I've said and how I may have changed things that I've said, or how I've elaborated on things that I've said, or if I make a reference to something I've said, you could actually go back and hear it in context, which is sometimes very important. So be aware. heresdathing.com is going to have a new feature. Well, we've reached the segment of the show where we have about 9 minutes left and nothing in particular to talk about. Oh yeah, I've always got something to talk about. Ask anyone. Okay, first off, a couple of quick items here. I noticed recently that fracking is purported to have caused some earthquakes in California. It also caused earthquakes in Youngstown, Ohio, if you'll recall correctly, or near Youngstown, Ohio. And just want to point out again that I've talked about fracking before. I'm not against this country developing all of its energy possibilities. However, I am against the reckless move into it. In other words, don't tell me what the consequences are after the fact. Tell me what the consequences are before you do it. Spend the money up front. That's one thing that these people won't do. They tell you everything's going to be all right until it isn't. And then they run around acting all self-righteous when they're trying to fix it. So, shout out to one of my Facebook friends for putting that on Facebook, because it is entirely possible And they don't have enough trouble with earthquakes already in California. You're going to go and aggravate the situation by constantly messing with the rocks underground. Just, again, we want all of that for us. Okay, another bad thing about fracking, as I mentioned in the past, most of the natural gas that would be recovered by it is slated to be shipped to China. That way they can keep our prices as high as they are or higher. Once again, do you see why I believe in some conspiracy theories? Okay, another topic. Let's see, where can we go with this? Ah, yes, the Middle East. Just yesterday, I was hearing that many of the very people who were screaming that we should never have been in Iraq in the first place are now complaining because we didn't stay. How's that for circular logic? Basically, what they were saying was that in the beginning, at least, when they were campaigning against George Bush, which, by the way, they still are, that we never should have been in Iraq. There was no reason for us to be in Iraq, and we had to pull out of Iraq. And so, the president pulled out of Iraq. And as a result, the Iraqis, the various factions that I talked about last week, started fighting one another more than they were when we were there. They were more focused on us when we were there. As we pulled out, they started again focusing on each other. And all of a sudden, you've got this faction called ISIS, or ISIL, or whatever they want to call it. The Islamic State. According to the people who now believe that we shouldn't have left Iraq, the reason that ISIS exists is because we left Iraq. And because we didn't arm the Syrian rebels. Even though we don't know who the Syrian rebels really are, and we can't really arm them that much. Bottom line is, last week's diatribe was all about helping our friends who help our enemies, who help our friends, who help our enemies, and so on and so forth. And that's what's happening. We go back into Iraq, well, then that pretty much completes the circle of Barack Hussein Obama doing everything that he said that George Bush shouldn't have done. Of course, he'll find a way to blame Bush. He'll say that because Bush went in, we have to go in again. But your advisors and your counselors and your consultants are telling you that you shouldn't have come out in the first place. But you shouldn't have been there in the first place. 1984, a book by George Orwell, talks about doublespeak, which leads to selective memory, which leads to throwing up information at people and they won't know what's true. So that's basically what's happening here. It has been and it will continue to happen. The Clintons are distancing themselves as quickly as possible from Obama because Hillary wants to run for president and they don't want to make it look as though she's going to continue his agenda. My personal opinion is don't kid yourself. She most assuredly will continue the agenda. She's a leftist. She is a socialist. She is a tax and spend Democrat. She firmly believes in the biggest government possible, and don't let her tell you otherwise. Because she'll do the same thing Barack did. Everything she criticizes him for, she'll turn around and do herself at some point in time. As far as that goes, all the politicians presently in Washington are turning their backs on the public. We know that. The Republican Party, which is supposed to be trying to win elections, beat the Democrats, is no longer engaged in that. They've had ample opportunity to point out some of the things that are obvious to many of us, and they won't do it. They don't want to offend anyone. They don't want to be called racist. So, We'll keep an eye on this. Remember, November is approaching fast, and the opportunity to change the faces of the people in Washington is coming. It is my sincere hope that the Republicans gain control of both houses of Congress, if for no other reason than to try to undo some of the damage that's been done, although I seriously doubt, well, the present regime at least won't have the cojones to do it. Maybe we'll get lucky and some people will get in who will have the cojones to do it. That being said, we move on. Well, we've reached the near conclusion of this week's edition of Here's the Thing. And on that note, I need to remind everyone who isn't watching that you can contact Here's the Thing and DPR the Man at hdt2010@roadrunner.com. Of course, go to the website. All the links are available. You can watch the show on YouTube or Google+. You can contact the show or comment on the show via Facebook, heresdathing.com. By the way, on YouTube or Google+, use the search term, Here's the Thing. And I sincerely hope that you do so. By doing so, your feedback becomes my feed. Tell me what you're thinking, and I'll tell you why you're thinking it. It's important to me to find out what you think, because you can't possibly be wrong. Although you may not be right, you won't be wrong. I may not be right, but I'm never wrong. So, please contact us. Check out the website. Come up with ideas that I can use for future programming. Messing with the music. Hey, we've reached the end of the show. The Stop and Keep Productions, along with WELBTBJ Radio, has proudly brought you this edition of Here's the Thing for September 24th, 2014. DPR the Man, that's who I am. And in my inimitable and unavoidable way, I will say to you, have a good day, have a good week, have a good life. Come back and see us or hear us next week on Here's the Thing. You may even be a part of it.